People assume the worst part of an 8-hour spinal surgery is the pain. It is not. It is waking up to a voicemail from your father saying he sold your $425,000 condo while you were under anesthesia. He facilitated the sale to pay for my sister's wedding, assuming I would be too weak to fight back. He was right about my body, but he was dead wrong about my leverage. My name is Nora Hamilton. That was the first fact I had to retrieve from the fog in my brain. The second fact was that my back felt like it had been cracked open and reassembled with hot iron rods, which, to be fair, was exactly what had happened. I was 33 years old, lying in a recovery room that smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee, staring up at a ceiling tile with a brown water stain that looked vaguely like a map of Texas. The nurse was hovering over me, her face a blurry oval of concern. She was saying something about pain scales and morphine pumps, but her voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. I blinked, trying to scrape the grit from my eyes. The anesthesia was still heavy in my blood, a thick, cloying syrup that made every thought move at half speed. "Ms. Hamilton?" the nurse asked, checking the plastic band on my wrist. "Can you hear me?" "Yes," I croaked. My throat felt like I had swallowed a handful of broken glass. "What time is it?" "It is just past 7 in the evening," she said, adjusting a tube connected to my arm. "You were in surgery for 9 hours. It went very well. Doctor, Evans is extremely pleased with the alignment." 9 hours. I had been unconscious for 9 hours. A whole workday. A flight to Europe. An eternity. I tried to shift my weight, and a spike of agony shot up my spine, white-hot and blinding. I gasped, freezing in place. "Don't move," the nurse cautioned gently. "Let the medication do its work." "Do you want your phone?" It has been buzzing nonstop on the bedside table. I had to silence it. My phone, my connection to the world, the sleek device that held my calendar, my contacts, and apparently, a catastrophe I was not prepared for. I nodded weakly. She placed the cold metal rectangle in my hand. It felt impossibly heavy, like a brick. I lifted it, my fingers trembling not just from the trauma of surgery, but from a sudden, unexplained dread. The screen lit up, assaulting my dilated pupils with artificial blue light. The notifications were a cascade of panic. 42 missed calls, 27 text messages, 14 voicemails. All of them were from 2 people, my father and my mother. My heart hammered against my ribs. A frantic rhythm that the bedside monitor picked up with a quickening beep, beep, beep. Had someone died? Had there been an accident? Was Sienna, my younger sister, okay? The instinct was instantaneous. It was the programming installed in me since birth. Worry about them first. Nora is the strong one. Nora can handle the pain. Check on the fragile ones. I bypassed the texts. I went straight to the voicemails. The most recent one was from my father, time-stamped 2 hours ago. I pressed the phone to my ear, my hand shaking so hard the device tapped against my temple. "Nora." My father's voice filled my ear. He was not crying. He did not sound frantic. He sounded businesslike. He sounded like he was closing a deal. "Look, we tried to reach you, but obviously, you are under... We had to make an executive decision, a family decision." I held my breath. The air in the room seemed to vanish. "The wedding venue called," he continued, his tone carrying that familiar mix of arrogance and martyrdom. "The deposit for the expanded guest list was due immediately, or Sienna was going to lose the date. We could not let that happen. You know how fragile she has been lately. We needed liquidity, fast." A pause. I could hear him inhaling, likely taking a drag of a cigarette or a sip of scotch. "We sold your condo. Nora." The words did not make sense. They were English words, arranged in a sentence, but my brain refused to process them. Sold? My condo? The one I bought 5 years ago? The one I renovated with my own hands? The one that was currently sitting empty because I had moved into a short-term rental near the hospital for the recovery period? "I know it sounds drastic," he went on, rushing a little now. "But the market is hot. and we got a cash offer, $425,000. It covers the wedding, the honeymoon, and leaves a little cushion for Sienna to get settled. Since you gave us that power of attorney for medical emergencies, the notary said we could use it to facilitate the transaction. We signed for you. It is done. We will figure out the details when you wake up. Just focus on healing. We did this for the family." The voicemail ended with a click. I lowered the phone. The silence in the room was absolute. The beeping of the monitor seemed to fade away. The pain in my back, which had been a screaming fire just moments ago, suddenly turned cold. Ice cold. $425,000. My life savings, my equity, my safety net, my sanctuary, gone. I lay there, staring at the water stain on the ceiling. I waited for the tears. I waited for the scream that should have torn through my throat. I waited for the panic attack that would bring the nurses running. But nothing came. Instead, a strange, terrifying stillness settled over me. It was a sensation I had never felt before. It was not peace. It was the feeling of a switch being flipped deep inside my brain. The emotional breakers had blown to protect the system. I was no longer a daughter. I was no longer a sister. I was an organism in survival mode. I replayed the message in my head. We signed for you. They had used a medical power of attorney, a document I had signed so they could make decisions if I ended up in a coma or on life support, to sell my real estate. They had weaponized my vulnerability. While I was lying on a table, cut open, my spine exposed to the air, trusting them to guard my life. They were in a notary's office, selling my home to pay for a party. Sienna. Of course, it was for Sienna, my beautiful, chaotic, helpless younger sister. Sienna, who needed the perfect dress. Sienna, who needed the destination wedding. Sienna, who had never held a job for more than 6 months because the vibes were toxic. Sienna, the golden child who broke things. And Nora, the sturdy one who glued them back together. I remembered the conversation 7 weeks ago. I had told my mother about the surgery date. "Oh, Nora," she had sighed, sounding exhausted by my news. "That is the same week as the final tasting for the menu. Can't you push it back? It is going to be so stressful for us to worry about you while we are trying to select the appetizers. I can't push it back." "Mom," I had said, gripping the phone. "I risk permanent nerve damage if I wait. I can't feel my left foot anymore." "Well, you always were dramatic," she had replied. "Fine, do what you have to do. Just don't expect us to be at the hospital. We have appointments." I had accepted that. I had accepted that I would undergo major surgery alone. I had hired a private nurse for the first 2 weeks. I had meal prepped 30 days of dinners and froze them. I had set up a bed in the living room of my rental. I had prepared to be alone, but I had not prepared to be robbed. $425,000, I whispered to the empty room. The number felt heavy on my tongue. It wasn't just money. That money was 10 years of 60-hour work weeks. It was missed vacations. It was driving a 10-year-old car so I could pay down the mortgage. That condo was the only thing I owned that was purely mine. It was the physical proof that I existed outside of them. It was my evidence that I was a person, not just a resource to be harvested when Sienna needed something shiny. The door opened, and a man in a white coat stepped in. "Dr. Evans." He looked tired but triumphant. "Nora, you are awake," he beamed, checking the charts the nurse had left. "Excellent. The surgery was a textbook success. We decompressed the nerve and stabilized the L4 and L5 vertebrae. You are going to have a long road of physical therapy. But the prognosis is fantastic. You are going to get your life back." I looked at him. He was a good man. He had skilled hands. He had fixed my bones. But he was wrong. I wasn't going to get my life back. My life, the one I had built, had been liquidated at a title company 3 hours ago. "Thank you, doctor," I said. My voice was steady, too steady. It sounded like a recording. "I appreciate everything you did." "You seem very calm," he observed, shining a penlight into my eyes. "Usually patients are a bit emotional coming out of this." "I am just processing," I lied. "Good. Rest. We will get you up and walking tomorrow." He left. I was alone again. The quiet in my head deepened. It was a cold, dark ocean. I realized then that something had died on that operating table. It wasn't my nerve endings. It wasn't my mobility. It was my hope. For 33 years, I had held on to a pathetic, childish hope that if I was good enough, successful enough, and helpful enough, my parents would finally look at me and see me. Not an ATM, not a fixer, just their daughter. That hope was dead. They had killed it for a wedding deposit. I looked at the phone again. I could call them. I could scream. I could demand they undo it. But I knew my parents. They would gaslight me. They would say I was being hysterical. They would say it was just money, and family mattered more. They would say I could always buy another one later because I was so smart. They would twist the knife until I apologized for bleeding on their shoes. No, I would not give them the satisfaction of my anger. Not yet. My thumb hovered over the screen. I did not open my recent calls. I did not open my contacts list for mom or dad. I typed in a number I had memorized but rarely used, a number for emergencies only. But not medical emergencies, life emergencies. It rang once. It rang twice. On the third ring, the line clicked open. There was no groggy hello or confused greeting. The voice on the other end was sharp, alert, and instantly commanding. "Nora?" the voice asked. "You should be in recovery. Is everything all right?" It was the one person in the world who knew exactly who my parents were. The one person who had warned me, years ago, that eventually they would eat me alive if I stayed on the plate. "I am out of surgery," I said. My voice didn't shake. "I am alive." "Good," the voice said. "But that is not why you are calling me." "No," I said. I looked up at the water stain again. It didn't look like Texas anymore. It looked like a gavel. "They sold it," I said. "They sold my condo while I was asleep." Silence on the other end. A sharp intake of breath. Then, a low, dangerous hum of understanding. "The whole thing?" "Everything. 425,000. For Sienna's wedding." "Okay," the voice said. It wasn't a question. It was an acceptance of a declaration of war. "What do you want to do? Do you want to cry? Or do you want to destroy them?" I closed my eyes. I could feel the morphine dripping into my veins, pushing the physical pain away, leaving only the cold clarity of the betrayal. I thought about the keys to my condo, likely already handed over to a stranger. I thought about my furniture, probably being sold or tossed into a dumpster. I thought about my father's voice, so sure of his authority over my existence. I took a deep breath. It hurt, but it felt good. It felt like fuel. "I cannot stand up yet," I whispered into the phone, clutching the device like a detonator. "I physically cannot stand up, but I can make them fall." To understand why the silence in that hospital room felt so heavy, you have to rewind the clock. You have to go back 7 weeks to a Tuesday afternoon that should have been one of the best days of my life. I was sitting in Dr. Evans' office, the air conditioning humming against the back of my neck. For the last 3 years, my life had been measured in varying degrees of agony. I had woken up in pain, worked in pain, and slept in fitful, twitching bursts because of pain. My lower back was a constant, grinding pressure, like a vice that someone tightened a little more every single morning. When Dr. Evans put the MRI scans up on the lightboard, he didn't sigh or shake his head. He smiled. He pointed to the compressed disc and the bone spur that had been making my left leg feel like it was being electrocuted. "We can fix this, Nora," he had said. "We have an opening on the 14th. It is a big surgery, but you are young and healthy. You will walk out of here with a new spine." The relief that washed over me was so intense I almost wept right there on the paper-covered exam table. It was the promise of a future. It was the end of a long, dark tunnel. I walked out to my car, moving slowly to avoid jarring my back, and I felt lighter than I had in a decade. My first instinct was to share this victory. I sat in the driver's seat of my sedan, the engine idling, and dialed my mother. She answered on the 4th ring. her voice distracted and breathless. I could hear the rustling of fabric in the background and the faint sound of high-energy pop music. "Mom," I said, unable to keep the tremor out of my voice. "I have news. Good news. The doctor can operate. They have a date for next month. I'm finally going to stop hurting." There was a pause. I expected a gasp. I expected a "thank God." I expected the maternal warmth that I saw in movies and read about in books. "Next month?" she asked. Her tone was sharp, not relieved. "What date exactly?" "The 14th, I said, my smile faltering slightly. "Oh, Nora," she groaned. The sound was one of pure inconvenience. "That is the week of the final vendor walkthrough. Sienna and I have to drive up to the venue to approve the floral architecture. We are deciding between cascading white wisteria or hanging glass orbs. It is incredibly high stakes." I stared at the dashboard. "Floral architecture?" "Yes, it is the entire concept. Nora, we are trying to create an ethereal garden vibe. I cannot possibly be running back and forth to a hospital while I'm trying to make sure the florist understands the difference between ivory and cream." "Can't you move it?" "I can't move it," I said, my voice hardening. "This is the only opening doctor. Evans has for 4 months. If I wait, the nerve damage could become permanent. I could lose the use of my foot." "You always go to the worst-case scenario," she dismissed, the fabric rustling louder now. "Fine, but do not expect me to be there to hold your hand. This wedding is a massive production. You know how Sienna gets when things aren't perfect." I hung up. I didn't say goodbye. I just pressed the red button and stared at the screen until it went black. I tried my father next. Surely, he would understand the logistics. He was the pragmatic one. "Dad," I said when he picked up, "I am getting the surgery. The 14th. "Bad timing," he said immediately. He didn't even ask about the procedure. "I have just put down the deposit for the catering upgrade. Money is tight, Nora, and time is tighter. Your mother is running around like a headless chicken. We need all hands on deck for this wedding, not someone bedridden." "I am not asking you to pay for it," I said, gripping the steering wheel. "My insurance covers 80%. I have savings for the rest. I just wanted you to know." "Well, good," he grunted, "because we are tapped out. The groom's family, the Grahams, they are serious people, old money, logistics people. We cannot look like we are cutting corners. If you are going to be out of commission, you need to make your own arrangements. Don't add to your mother's load." Make my own arrangements. That was the family motto when it came to Nora Hamilton. So, I did, for the next 6 weeks, while my parents and Sienna debated the merits of silk versus velvet ribbons. I turned into a project manager for my own recovery. I interviewed home health aides. They were expensive, $25 an hour, but I knew I would need help getting to the bathroom for the first 2 weeks. I hired a woman named Brenda, a no-nonsense grandmother with strong arms and a kind face. I spent 3 weekends cooking. I made huge batches of beef stew, chicken soup, and lasagna. I portioned them into single-serving glass containers, labeled them with dates, and stacked them in my freezer like bricks in a wall. I moved my mattress from the master bedroom to the living room because the stairs would be impossible. I set up a station next to the bed with chargers, water bottles, and medication organizers. I built a fortress of solitude. I prepared to survive my own family. 2 weeks before the surgery, my phone rang. It was my mother again. For a brief, foolish second, I thought she was calling to check on me. Maybe she had realized that her eldest daughter was about to have her spine sliced open. "Nora," she said, her voice dripping with a sweetness that usually preceded a bill. "Are you sitting down? The most terrible thing has happened." "What?" I asked, my heart jumping. "Is Sienna okay?" "She is a wreck," Mom said. "Absolute wreck. We just found out that the Graham family is hosting the rehearsal dinner at the country club. The exclusive one. We originally budgeted for a moderate welcome party, but now we have to match their energy. We can't have the wedding look cheaper than the rehearsal. It would be humiliating." "Okay," I said, waiting for the punchline. "We need to upgrade the reception lighting and the favors," she said. "It is another $15,000. Your father and I are a little illiquid right now with the deposits we just paid. We were hoping you could chip in. Call it a wedding gift." I looked around my living room. I looked at the stack of medical bills that had already started arriving for the pre-op testing. I looked at the quote for the home health aide. "No," I said. "Excuse me?" I said no. I have a deductible to meet. I have to pay Brenda to help me walk to the toilet. I am not paying $15,000 so Sienna can have better party favors. "You are being incredibly selfish," Mom snapped, the sweetness evaporating instantly. "This is your sister's one day. You have that fancy job. You have that condo sitting there building equity. You can afford it. You just want to punish us." "I am hanging up now," I said, and I did. That conversation replayed in my head as I looked around my condo that evening. This place was my sanctuary. It was a 2-bedroom unit in a historic building downtown, with high ceilings and exposed brick walls that I had spent months restoring. I had bought it 5 years ago when the neighborhood was still up and coming. Risking everything I had on the down payment. My parents had called it a risky bet back then. They told me I should have saved the money for a rainy day or given it to them to invest in one of my father's surefire business schemes that always seemed to fizzle out after 6 months. But I had held firm. I paid the mortgage. I renovated the kitchen myself, learning how to tile a backsplash from internet videos because I couldn't afford a contractor. Every inch of that 1,200 square feet was proof of my competence. It was proof that I didn't need them. To them. My condo was just an asset. It was a line item on a balance sheet. But to me, it was the only place in the world where I was safe. And then there was Sienna. Sienna was 5 years younger than me, and she had never had an awkward phase. She came out of the womb ready for a camera. She had glossy hair, perfect teeth, and an ability to make people want to give her things. She wasn't malicious, exactly. She was just entirely, blissfully unaware that other people existed as anything other than supporting characters in her movie. Sienna didn't work. She curated. She had an Instagram account with 50,000 followers where she posted photos of lattes, sunsets, and outfits that my parents paid for. She described herself as a lifestyle consultant, though I had never seen her consult on anything other than her own reflection. She hated being compared to me. She called me corporate and rigid. She told me I had no soul because I cared about things like 401k matches and credit scores. "You are so boring." "Nora," she would say, sipping a $20 cocktail I had just paid for. "You never live in the moment." But whenever the moment got too expensive, she came to me. I remembered the time 3 years ago when she crashed her car, a convertible my dad had bought her. She didn't want to tell them because she had been texting while driving and insurance wouldn't cover it. She came to my condo, crying, mascara running down her face. "Fix it, Nora, please. Dad will kill me." I paid $2,000 to a body shop to hammer out the dent and repaint the bumper. I never told our parents. Sienna never paid me back. She never even said thank you after the initial relief wore off. It was just expected. Nora fixes it. It wasn't just Sienna, though. I had been bailing my parents out for a decade. There was the time my father forgot to pay the property tax on their house and they were facing a lien. I wrote a check for $6,000. There was the time my mother maxed out her credit cards buying investment pieces for a boutique she wanted to open. A boutique that never opened. I transferred $4,000 to clear the debt so her credit score wouldn't tank. They never called these loans. They called it family helping family. But the help only ever flowed one way. When I needed them, when I was sick, when I was lonely, when I was facing surgery, the river ran dry. I sat on my sofa, the leather cool against my skin, and looked at the wall. I had framed the deed to the condo. It hung in the hallway. A discreet little rectangle of paper that meant more to me than any diploma. That deed said I was an owner. It said I had a place in the world that could not be taken away. It was my boundary. I realized then, sitting in the quiet of the evening before my surgery, that my family viewed me as a resource, I was a reservoir they could tap whenever a drought hit. And this wedding? This wedding was the biggest drought they had ever seen. The Graham family was wealthy, not new car wealthy. They were buildings named after grandfathers wealthy. My parents were terrified. They were terrified of being exposed as middle-class imposters. They were desperate to buy their way into the Grahams' respect. And they were willing to burn anything to keep the fire going. I just never thought I would be the firewood. I went to sleep that night in the bed I had made in the living room. I looked at the ceiling of my condo, tracing the crown molding with my eyes. I whispered a promise to myself. This is mine. They can't touch this. I was so naive. I didn't understand the desperation of people who value appearance over blood. I didn't understand that to them. My condo wasn't a home. It was just a pile of cash sitting uselessly in the form of bricks and mortar. While they needed champagne and hanging glass orbs, I closed my eyes, dreading the morning, dreading the pain, dreading the loneliness, but mostly, I felt a strange, vibrating tension in my gut. It was the instinct of an animal sensing a predator. I pushed it down. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself that no matter how selfish they were, there were lines they would not cross. I was wrong about the lines. They didn't just cross them, they erased them while I slept. The morning of the surgery was a study in clinical efficiency. I remember the cold press of the stethoscope, the scratch of the hospital gown, and the rhythmic beeping of the monitor that served as the soundtrack to my final moments of consciousness. The anesthesiologist, a man with kind eyes and a mask that hid his smile, told me to count backward from 10. 10, I whispered. The lights above me were blindingly white, a sterile sun that never set. 9. My limbs felt heavy, like they were sinking into wet sand. 8. The room began to blur at the edges, while I was drifting into the black void, unaware and defenseless. Another scene was playing out across town. I can picture it now with sickening clarity, pieced together from the timestamps on the documents I would later uncover. At the exact moment the surgeon made the first incision into my back, my father was sitting in a plush leather chair at a title company, a pen in his hand. My mother was next to him, likely checking her watch, worried about being late for a cake tasting. The notary would have asked for identification. They would have produced the medical power of attorney, a document intended to let them make life-or-death medical decisions if I was incapacitated. They didn't use it to save my life. They used it to liquidate it. 7, the anesthesiologist had said, and somewhere in a quiet office. My father signed my name, Nora Hamilton, by Thomas Hamilton, attorney in fact. The ink dried while I bled. Waking up to the reality of what they had done was not a sudden explosion of noise. It was a slow, creeping horror, like realizing you are trapped in a room with the oxygen being sucked out. I lay in my hospital bed, the phone hot against my ear. Replaying my father's voicemail for the 10th time, I wasn't listening to the words anymore. I was listening to the background noise. I was listening to the tone. We had to make an executive decision, he had said. There was no tremor in his voice, no hesitation. You don't sell a $400,000 property on a whim. You don't find a buyer, draft a contract, clear a title, and close a deal in the 9 hours a person is in surgery. Real estate doesn't move that fast, not unless it was already in motion. The realization hit me harder than the post-op pain. This wasn't an emergency decision made in a panic. This was premeditated. They had listed my condo days, maybe weeks, before my surgery. They had found a cash buyer who wanted a quick close. They had lined everything up, waiting for the one window of time when I would be physically unable to stop them. They waited until I was unconscious to rob me. I dialed my father. My fingers were stiff, but my rage was a precision instrument. He answered on the second ring. Nora, you're awake. Good. How is the back? Don't, I said. My voice was raspy, but it cut through the air like a scalpel. Don't ask about my back. Tell me about the house. He sighed, the sound of a man who feels unfairly burdened by someone else's reaction. Nora, please, not now. We are in the middle of the seating chart. It is a nightmare. The Grahams want the head table to be round, but the venue only has rectangular ones. You sold my condo, Dad, I said, enunciating every syllable. You used a medical power of attorney to sell my home. Do you realize that is fraud? Do you realize that is theft? It is not theft, he snapped, his patience evaporating. It is asset reallocation. We needed the liquidity. The market is volatile. Nora, we got you a great price, cash, no contingencies. You should be thanking me. I handled a very complex transaction while you were sleeping. You had no right, I said. I had the legal right, he countered smoothly. The document you signed gives me broad powers to handle your financial affairs if you are unavailable. You were unavailable. We made a family decision. You are part of this family. So it is your decision too. You will agree with it once the drugs wear off and you see the wedding photos. It is going to be spectacular. Facilitate, I whispered, remembering the word he used in the voicemail. You didn't facilitate anything. You stole from me. Stop being dramatic, he said. We will pay you back. Eventually, once Sienna is settled and the business picks up, consider it a loan, a bridge loan. A loan implies consent, I said, and terms, and interest. We are family, Nora. We don't charge interest on love. I have to go. The florist is here. He hung up. I stared at the phone, my chest heaving. He truly believed he had done nothing wrong. In his mind, my assets were just an extension of his own. I was a subsidiary of Hamilton Incorporated, and the parent company had decided to liquidate a holding. 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed again. My mother. Your father tells me you are being difficult, she said, skipping the greeting. Honestly, Nora, today of all days, do you know how much stress I am under? Sienna is having a meltdown about the napkins. They are ecru, not ivory, and now you are calling and screaming at your father? I didn't scream, I said calmly. I asked why I am homeless. You are not homeless, she scoffed. You can stay with us for a few weeks while you recover, although, with the wedding prep, it might be chaotic. Maybe a hotel would be better. We can use some of the sale proceeds to get you a nice room, not too expensive. Though, we need every penny for the reception. You sold my house to buy napkins, I said. We sold an investment property to secure your sister's future, she corrected me shrilly. This marriage is a game changer for us. Nora, the Grahams are powerful. If this wedding goes perfectly, your father could get contracts with their shipping firm. This benefits all of us. Why are you so selfish? You always make everything about you. I closed my eyes. The gaslighting was so practiced, so seamless. I was the villain for wanting to keep the home I paid for. They were the heroes for stealing it. A cold thought entered my mind, a leverage point they had forgotten. Mom, I said, my voice dropping an octave. You talk a lot about assets and ownership. You seem very confident about what belongs to whom. What are you babbling about? The house you are standing in right now, I said. The one on Elm Street, the one you and Dad have lived in for 5 years. My house? What about it? Are you sure you know who owns it? There was a pause, a beat of silence where the air crackled with confusion. Then, she laughed. It was a harsh, dismissive sound. You are delirious, she said. The anesthesia has rotted your brain. We own this house. We have paid the rent, the mortgage, every month. Go to sleep. Nora, stop trying to scare us. It is pathetic. She hung up. She had slipped. She said rent before correcting it to mortgage. She didn't know. They truly didn't know. I lowered the phone to my lap. The pain in my back was returning, a dull throb that synchronized with my heartbeat. But my mind was crystal clear. They thought they had won. They thought they had stripped me of my biggest asset and that I would just roll over and take it, because that is what I had always done. They thought I was the same Nora who paid their property taxes and fixed Sienna's car. They were wrong. I opened the Notes app on my phone. My fingers flew across the screen. Timeline of events. March 1st. Surgery scheduled. March 3rd. Dad asks for money for catering. March 10th. Mom mentions needing liquidity. March 14th. Surgery day. Condo sold. I logged into my email. I searched for anything from the title company. Nothing. They had likely diverted the emails to a spam folder or changed the contact address on file. I logged into my bank app. The mortgage was paid off. The balance was zero, but the surplus, the equity check, wasn't in my account. They had directed the funds elsewhere, probably to a joint account they controlled, or straight to the vendors. I took screenshots of everything, the call logs, the voicemails. I saved them to the cloud, the empty bank account. I wasn't going to argue with them anymore. I wasn't going to beg. Arguments were for people who wanted to be understood. I didn't want to be understood. I wanted to be effective. I pulled up my text messages and found Sienna's thread. The last message was from 2 months ago. A photo of a diamond ring with the caption, "It's happening." I typed a reply. My thumb hovered over the send button. "See you at the wedding." I sent it. It was a promise. It was a threat. It was the only warning they were going to get. I put the phone down and looked out the window. The sky was turning purple with twilight. I was alone in a hospital room, my body broken, my home sold, my family traitors. But I smiled, because my mother had asked if I knew who owned her house, and for the first time in years. I knew exactly where the power lay. They had sold my past, but I owned their future. I did not call the police immediately. The police deal with crimes that have already happened, and they are notoriously bad at navigating the gray areas of domestic betrayal. If I called the police, my father would waive the notarized power of attorney, claim it was a civil misunderstanding, and I would be left standing on the curb with nothing but a case number. No, I needed something sharper than the police. I called the one person in the Hamilton family tree who terrified my father, his older sister, Marianne. Aunt Marianne was retired now, living in a bungalow in Florida that smelled of lemon verbena and old paper. But for 30 years, she had been a forensic accountant. Her job had been to look at numbers that people tried to hide and find the story they were telling. She had audited corporations, divorce settlements, and even a few minor cartels. She knew that money always leaves a trail, like a slug moving across concrete. She listened to me for 10 minutes without interrupting. I told her everything: the surgery, the voicemail, the sale, the $425,000 that had vanished into the wedding industrial complex. When I finished, there was a silence on the line. I expected sympathy. I expected her to say, "Oh, honey, I am so sorry." Instead, she made a sound that was half hiss, half chuckle. "Thomas always was a greedy little boy," she said, her voice dry as parchment. "He used to steal change from your grandmother's purse and buy candy, then help her look for the money so he could look like the hero. He hasn't changed. He just added zeros to the theft." "I don't know what to do, Aunt Marianne," I admitted, clutching the phone. I was sitting in my rental, surrounded by the boxes I hadn't unpacked. "I feel like I am drowning." "Stop that," she commanded. "You are not drowning. You are calculating. Now, answer me this. Do you want to get your money back, or do you want to destroy them?" "I want my house back," I said. "That is not what I asked," she corrected. "Getting the house back is a legal process. It is slow. It is boring. It will take 2 years in civil court. By the time you win, that money will be spent on champagne and floral arches, and your parents will be pleading bankruptcy. You will get a judgment on a piece of paper that is worth $0. She paused, letting the reality sink in. "So I ask you again, Nora, do you want a legal victory, or do you want a reputation victory? Do you want to be right, or do you want to be the one holding the whip?" "I want them to hurt," I said. The words tasted like copper in my mouth. "I want them to feel exactly as powerless as I felt when I woke up in that recovery room." "Good," Marianne said. "Then you need a shark. not a family lawyer. You need a litigator who eats nails for breakfast. Go to Evan Carter. He handled my divorce in '98. He is expensive, but he hates liars more than he loves money. 2 days later, I was sitting across from Evan Carter. His office was not warm. It was glass and steel, located on the 42nd floor of a building that looked down on the rest of the city. Evan was a man in his 50s, wearing a suit that cost more than my first car. He didn't offer me coffee. He didn't ask how my recovery was going. He just held out his hand for the documents. I handed him the folder containing the copies of the power of attorney, the sale deed I had pulled from public records, and the timeline I had constructed. He read in silence for 20 minutes. The only sound was the flipping of pages and the hum of the server rack in the corner. Finally, he took off his reading glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "This is sloppy," he said. "The notary stamp looks legitimate, but the witness signature is illegible. Your father signed as your attorney in fact, which he is technically allowed to do under the document you signed. However, the fiduciary duty clause is explicit. He is supposed to act in your best interest. Selling your primary residence while you are incapacitated to fund a party is the definition of a breach of fiduciary duty. So we can sue?" I asked. Leaning forward, my back twinged, a sharp reminder of my physical weakness, but I ignored it. "We can sue," Evan agreed. "We can file for fraud, conversion, and breach of trust. We can probably get a judge to freeze their accounts. But here's the problem. Ms. Hamilton, the buyer." He tapped the sale deed. "The people who bought your condo? The Millers? They are what the law calls bona fide purchasers for value. They paid cash. They didn't know your father was screwing you over. They saw a valid power of attorney and a motivated seller. If we try to unwind the sale, we have to sue them too. They will fight back. It will get tied up in court for 18 months, minimum. Meanwhile, your parents will spend the cash. By the time we get a judgment, the money will be gone, and you will be left trying to collect from people who are experts at playing the victim." I felt the blood drain from my face. So they get away with it? They just steal $500,000 and I have to wait 2 years to get a piece of paper saying they were wrong? Evan leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "That is the legal reality. The law is a shield, Nora, but it is a heavy one. It is hard to swing it fast enough to hit a moving target." He looked at me, his eyes narrowing. "Unless," he said softly, "unless what?" "Unless you have leverage. The law works best when it is a threat, not a weapon. If we want to settle this quickly, before the money is gone, we need something to hold over their heads, something that matters to them more than the money." He paused, studying me. "Your aunt told me you are smart. She said you are the one who actually runs the family, even if they don't know it. Is there anything else? Any other assets? Any debts they owe you?" I looked down at my hands. I had been waiting for this moment. I had been debating whether to reveal it, even to myself. It felt like pulling a pin on a grenade that I had been carrying in my pocket for 5 years. "There is the house on Elm Street," I said quietly. Evan frowned. "The parents' house, public records show that is owned by a company called North Hill Management, LLC. Your parents are tenants." "I know," I said. "I am North Hill Management." Evan stopped moving. He looked at me, then at his computer screen, then back at me. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. "Explain," he commanded. I reached into my bag and pulled out a second folder. This one was older, the edges slightly worn. I opened it and slid the documents across the polished mahogany desk. 5 years ago, my father made a bad bet on a commercial real estate deal, I began. He leveraged the family home. He didn't tell my mother. By the time the bank sent the foreclosure notice, he was 3 months behind. They were going to lose everything: the house, the cars, the status. My mother would have fallen apart. My sister would have had to drop out of her private college. "So you bailed them out," Evan guessed. "They called me at 2 a.m, I said, remembering the panic in my father's voice, the way he had begged. I had the money from a tech stock windfall I had gotten early in my career. I could have just given it to them, But I knew if I gave them a check, they would just remortgage the house again in a year. They have no financial discipline. I pointed to the articles of organization for the LLC. So I told them I knew an investor, a private equity guy who bought distressed assets. I told them this investor would pay off the bank, take the title, and let them stay in the house as renters for a rate below market value. They were so desperate they didn't ask questions. They just signed the deed over to the company. "And you are the sole member of the LLC," Evan said, reading the document. "Yes, North Hill. It is just an anagram of my name. Sort of. Nora Hamilton. No Hill. They never checked the state registry. They have been paying rent to a PTO box for 5 years. I use that money to pay the property taxes and insurance. I haven't made a dime of profit. I just wanted to keep a roof over their heads." Evan let out a low whistle. "They are living in your house, thinking they are fooling a corporate landlord, while stealing your condo to pay for a party." "Yes," I said. "And the lease?" Evan asked, flipping to the back of the stack. "What are the terms?" "It is a standard 12-month lease," I said. "It auto-renews, but there is a clause. Clause 14B. Evan found it. He read it aloud. "Landlord reserves the right to terminate tenancy with 30 days written notice in the event of the property being listed for sale or for owner occupancy. Or," I added, "for non-payment or breach of contract. But we don't even need a breach. The lease is month to month now. I can end it for no reason at all." The room went silent. The air conditioning vents hummed. This was it. This was the weapon. For 5 years, I had held this secret not as a trap, but as a safety net. I wanted to ensure they always had a home. I wanted to protect them from their own incompetence. I had let them play the role of the lords of the manor while I quietly paid the bills from the shadows. I had let them look down on me, criticize my choices, and treat me like the help, all while I literally owned the roof over their heads. But they had broken the compact. They had taken my safety net, my condo, and shredded it. So now, I was going to pull theirs out from under them. Evan closed the folder. He placed his hands flat on the desk. He looked at me with a new level of respect. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a player. "This changes the game," he said. "The condo is gone. Nora, we can fight for the cash. But the condo is gone. But this is nuclear. If we serve them with an eviction notice or a notice to vacate, their entire world collapses. No house, no venue for the morning after brunch. And most importantly, the Grahams, the groom's family, will find out that your parents are not landed gentry. They are tenants being evicted by their own daughter." "I know," I said. "This gives us leverage to demand the wedding money back." Evan strategized. "We can tell them, return the 400 grand, or get out of the house, but—" He paused, tapping his pen against his lip. "But what?" "But the timing is everything," he said. "If we do this now, 2 weeks before the wedding, they might panic and cancel the wedding themselves. They might spin it that you are a monster. They have time to create a narrative." He leaned forward, his eyes dark and calculating. "Or," he whispered, "we let them walk into the trap. We let them think they got away with it. We let them stand up at that wedding, surrounded by the Grahams, surrounded by all the people they are trying to impress. We let them make their toasts. We let them brag." "And then?" I asked. "And then we drop the hammer," Evan said. "We don't just sue them, we expose them. We reveal the true ownership of the house when they have the most to lose. When the audience is biggest," he looked at the calendar on his desk. "The wedding is in 10 days?" "Yes," I said. "Sienna is the golden child," Evan mused. "But you hold the deed, so, Nora, the question isn't whether we can win. The question is purely theatrical." He smiled. And it wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a wolf who just found the door to the sheep pen unlocked. "You want to hurt them," he said, echoing my words from earlier. "So, tell me, do you want them to know the truth now, in private? Or do you want them to find out when there is a microphone in your hand? I thought about the voicemail again. We facilitated the sale. Family decision. I thought about my mother laughing at me. Do you know who owns this house? I looked Evan in the eye. Draw up the papers, I said. But don't send them yet. I want to deliver them myself. The folder in my hands felt heavier than it looked. It contained only about 20 pages of paper. Mostly standard legal boilerplate, but the weight came from the history pressed between the sheets. To understand the weapon I was about to unleash, you have to understand that it was never designed to be a weapon. It was designed to be a life raft. I need to take you back to a night 5 years ago. It was a Tuesday in November, raining the kind of cold. Miserable rain that seeps into your bones. I was living in a rental apartment then, saving every penny for the down payment on the condo I would eventually buy and lose. My phone rang at 2:30 in the morning. When you get a call at that hour, your brain cycles through 3 possibilities: death, accident, or jail. I answered with my heart in my throat, expecting a police officer. Instead, I heard my father. He was weeping. It was a sound I had never heard before. My father was a man of bluster and volume, a man who commanded rooms and waiters with equal arrogance. He did not cry, but that night, he sounded like a child who had dropped his ice cream in the dirt. "We are going to lose it all. Nora," he sobbed. "They are coming on Monday. The sheriff is coming on Monday." I sat up, switching on the lamp. "Who is coming? What are you talking about?" "The bank," he choked out. "We are 4 months behind on the mortgage. I tried to move some money around. I tried to get a bridge loan from a contact in Jersey. It fell through. They served the foreclosure notice. We have until Monday to pay the arrears, or they auction the house." I felt a cold pit open in my stomach. The house on Elm Street. The house where I grew up. The house where Sienna was currently sleeping in her canopy bed, likely dreaming of becoming an influencer, completely unaware that the roof over her head was effectively gone. "How much?" I asked. I was already doing the math in my head. I had a significant amount of cash sitting in a high-yield savings account, money I had earned from a Lucky Tech stock option grant at my first big job. It was my freedom fund. It was supposed to be for my future home. $32,000 to stop the foreclosure, he said. But the principal is another $300,000, and my credit score is shot. Nora, no one will refinance me, even if I pay the arrears. The rate is adjusting next month. It is going to double. We can't sustain it. He broke down again. Your mother, if she finds out we are being evicted, it will kill her. She defines herself by that address. You know how she is. I did know how she was. My mother would rather die than be seen moving into a rental complex. She would rather starve than lose her status in the garden club. I sat there in the dark, listening to my father beg. I knew 2 things with absolute certainty. First, if I gave him the $32,000 to catch up, he would be back in the same hole 6 months later. My parents did not have an income problem. They had a spending problem. They were allergic to budgets. Second, I could not let them be homeless. Despite everything, despite the favoritism, the neglect, the way they looked at me like a utility rather than a person, I still loved them. I was 28 years old, and I still desperately wanted to be the good daughter. I wanted to be the hero. So I made a plan that required me to be smarter than them, which, tragically, was not difficult. Dad, I said, my voice steady. Stop crying. I can fix this. You have the money? He gasped. You will write a check? No, I said. I am not giving you a check. That is a bandage on a bullet hole. I am going to call a friend of mine. He runs a private investment firm that buys distressed real estate. He keeps the owners in the home as tenants. It is called a sale-leaseback. It saves your credit, pays off the bank, and you don't have to move. A firm? He asked, sounding wary. Will people know? Will the neighbors know? No, I lied. It is totally private. The deed transfers to an LLC, to the outside world. Nothing changes. You just pay rent instead of a mortgage." He agreed. He was too desperate not to. The next morning, I did not call a friend. I called a lawyer I knew from college who specialized in corporate anonymity. We formed a company called North Hill Management, LLC. It sounded generic, professional, and boring. North for Nora, Hill for Hamilton. I transferred my entire savings, my Freedom Fund, into the LLC's account. 3 days later, North Hill Management, LLC, purchased the house on Elm Street from my parents for the exact amount of the outstanding mortgage debt. It wasn't a sale for profit. It was a rescue mission. I paid off the bank. I cleared the arrears. I assumed the title. My parents signed the papers at their kitchen table. They were so relieved they didn't even read the articles of incorporation. They didn't notice that the registered agent for the LLC was my college friend's law firm. They certainly didn't look for my name, because why would they? In their minds, I was just Nora, the girl who worked in logistics, the girl who was steady but not savvy. They couldn't conceive that their daughter was the one buying them out. They signed a lease agreement with North Hill Management. The rent was set at $1,800 a month, about half of what the market rate should have been. It was just enough to cover the property taxes, the insurance, and a small maintenance fund. I wasn't making a profit. I was subsidizing their lifestyle. For 5 years. They paid that rent, every month. A check from my father would arrive at the P&O box I had set up. Every month, I would drive to the post office, collect the check, deposit it into the LLC account, and use it to keep their world spinning. And the irony? They complained about North Hill Management constantly. At Thanksgiving dinners, my father would pour a glass of wine and gripe. "This management company is a pain," he would say. "They sent a letter about the gutters, faceless corporate vultures. They don't understand the charm of an older home." I would sit there, chewing my turkey, and say nothing. "At least they haven't raised the rent," my mother would chime in. "Although I am sure they will. That is what these companies do. They squeeze the little guy." I wanted to scream. I wanted to slam my fist on the table and shout, "I am the vulture. I am the one keeping the rent low. I am the one who paid for the new water heater last winter when you called the emergency line, and I had to hire a plumber from 3 towns over so he wouldn't recognize me." But I never did. I stayed silent because I wanted to preserve their dignity. I knew that if they learned the truth, that their daughter owned their house, they'd feel humiliated. And then that humiliation would harden into resentment. And then they'd stop paying. They'd assume that because I was family, they could live for free. So I kept the secret. I kept it to protect them. I kept it because part of me was still soft. Part of me believed that if I quietly took care of them, the universe would reward me. I looked down at the folder in my lap. The universe hadn't rewarded me. The universe, wearing my parents' faces, had waited until I was in recovery and then pulled the floor out from under me. They had taken my kindness and mistaken it for weakness. They had taken my silence for ignorance. The softness in me was gone now. The procedure had fixed the herniated disc, but the betrayal had stripped away my hesitation. I opened the folder and studied the lease agreement. There it was, in black and white, signed by Thomas and Linda Hamilton. Clause 14B. Owner reserves the right to terminate tenancy. I wasn't going to evict them because I was greedy. I wasn't going to evict them because I wanted the money. I was going to evict them because they had broken the fundamental social contract of a family. You do not eat your own young. I sealed the documents back into the envelope. I wrote a single name on the front. Mary Ann. I drove to my aunt's house. Driving was still difficult. I had to recline the seat far back to keep the pressure off my spine. And every bump in the road sent a shockwave through my nervous system. But the physical pain was grounding. It reminded me of why I was doing this. Mary Ann was waiting for me on her porch. She was wearing a floral caftan and smoking a thin cigarette, looking like a retired queen in exile. I hobbled up the walkway, leaning heavily on my cane. She didn't rush to help me. She knew I didn't want pity. I reached the top step and held out the envelope. "This is it," I said. "The deed, the lease, the proof of payment history, and the eviction notice, drafted and ready to be served. Marianne took the envelope. She weighed it in her hand. Just as I had. She looked at me, her sharp blue eyes searching my face for any sign of hesitation. "You know what this does?" she said. It wasn't a question. "This isn't just taking a house, Nora. This is stripping them naked in front of the world. This destroys the myth of Thomas Hamilton. He will never recover from this socially." "He sold my home to buy napkins," I said. "He destroyed me first. I am just returning the favor." "And Sienna?" Marianne asked. "She is collateral damage in this. She will be homeless too." "Sienna is 28 years old," I said cold. "It is time she learned that roofs cost money." Marianne nodded slowly. A small, terrifying smile touched her lips. She tapped the envelope against her palm. "I have hated your father's arrogance since we were teenagers," she admitted. "He always thought he could charm his way out of mathematics. He thought the rules didn't apply to him." She tucked the envelope under her arm. "I will keep this safe," she said. "When do we use it?" "The wedding," I said. "The reception. When he gives his toast. When he starts talking about legacy and family values." "It will be a bloodbath," Marianne noted with satisfaction. "It will be a correction," I said. "Market correction." I turned to leave, but stopped. I needed one more thing. I needed a witness who wouldn't flinch. "Aunt Marianne," I said. "Yes?" "Get a nice dress," I told her. "You are coming to the wedding with me." "I wasn't invited," she reminded me. "Your mother says I bring bad energy." "I don't care," I said. "You are my +1, and trust me, you are going to want a front row seat for the energy I am bringing." 12 days before the wedding, the war moved from the private sector to the public square. I was sitting in my temporary living room, nursing a cup of tea and icing my lower back. When my phone screen lit up, it was not a text or a call. It was an Instagram notification. Then another, then 5 more in rapid succession. "Sienna Hamilton mentioned you in their story." I felt a weary tightening in my stomach. Sienna lived her life on a stage where the audience was 5,000 followers who mostly consisted of bots, old high school classmates, and people she had met once at brunch. She did not post things for posterity. She posted them for ammunition. I opened the app. The screen went black, filled with white typewriter font text, the universal visual language of an influencer claiming victimhood. It breaks my heart that my own blood can't be happy for me. The text read, "I am trying so hard to keep my peace before the big day, but the toxicity is unreal. Some people would rather hoard their privilege than help their family. Jealousy is a disease. Get well soon." She didn't tag me directly in the text. That would have been too bold. Instead, she had tagged me in the bottom right corner, tiny and almost invisible, so that I would get the notification. But her followers would have to tap to see who the villain was. It was passive-aggressive art. I watched the story. Then I watched the next one. It was a video of her crying. She was sitting in her car, my parents' car, wearing oversized sunglasses, wiping a single, photogenic tear from her cheek. "I just don't understand." She sniffled to the camera. "Why do I have to fight so hard for my fairy tale? You think you know people. You think your sister is your best friend. And then, when you need them most, they just turn off. They make it all about money. It is so gross." I put the phone down on the coffee table. I did not scream. I did not throw the mug against the wall. I felt a cold, clinical detachment, like a scientist observing a particularly fascinating mold culture. "Hoard their privilege," I whispered to the empty room. That was the narrative she was spinning. My hard-earned savings. The equity I had built while she was partying in Tulum and finding herself was now framed as privilege. My refusal to be robbed was jealousy. The fallout was immediate. My mother's friends, a battalion of women with too much time and too little context, began to invade my direct messages. "Nora, I saw Sienna's post. I am so disappointed in you. Family comes first. Nora, You can always make more money, but you can't make a new sister. Don't be a bitter spinster. Let her have her moment. Your mother is so stressed. Why are you doing this to her? I read every single one. I didn't block them. I didn't reply. I didn't defend myself. I didn't type out paragraphs explaining that my privilege was actually a stolen condo and a spine held together by titanium screws. Instead, I took screenshots. Click, archive. Click, archive. I created a folder on my cloud drive named The Gallery. I saved the hateful messages. The comments under Sienna's latest photo where people were trash-talking the evil sister, and the timestamps. I was building a museum of their cruelty. And on the wedding day, I intended to open the exhibit. Around 7 in the evening, my phone rang. It was Aunt Sheila. Sheila was my mother's younger sister, a woman who viewed keeping the peace as the highest moral virtue, regardless of the cost. "Nora," she said, her voice breathless with manufactured concern, "I am calling to facilitate a truce. There is no war." "Aunt Sheila," I said calmly, "just a theft." "Oh, stop using that word," she clucked. "It is so harsh. Look, your mother is a wreck. She told me you are threatening to sue? Over a house?" "Nora, honey, it is just brick and mortar. Is it really worth tearing the family apart?" "They sold my home while I was under anesthesia." "Sheila." "And they said they would pay you back," she argued. "But that is beside the point. The point is, Sienna is crying her eyes out. She thinks you hate her. You need to be the bigger person here. You are the oldest. You are the strong one. Just call her. Apologize for the misunderstanding. Tell her you support the wedding, and let's get through the next 2 weeks. For your mother's sake." "Apologize?" I repeated. The word tasted like ash. "You want me to apologize to the people who robbed me?" "I want you to fix the energy," Sheila snapped. "You are casting a shadow over the whole event. Just swallow your pride. Nora, say you are sorry. Smooth it over. You can deal with the finances later. Don't ruin the wedding." I looked at the screenshot on my laptop screen. A comment from Sheila on Sienna's post that read, "Stay strong. Sweetie, light always wins over darkness." "I am not the darkness. Sheila," I said. "I am the bank, and the bank is closed." I hung up. I blocked her number. The silence returned to the apartment. But my mind was racing. Something about Sienna's video bothered me. Not the fake tears. Those were standard. It was the specific phrasing she used. "They make it all about money." Sienna usually didn't think about money. She thought about vibes and aesthetics. To her, money was just a magical substance that appeared when she needed it. For her to be so focused on the financial aspect suggested she knew exactly what that money represented. I picked up my iPad and went back to Sienna's Instagram profile. I didn't look at the stories this time. I looked at the feed. I scrolled back 3 weeks, 4 weeks. I was looking for a timeline. I wanted to see when the wedding planning shifted from budget-conscious to Versailles. I found a photo from 6 weeks ago. It was a flat-lay shot of a wedding binder, surrounded by color swatches, a latte, and a gold pen. The caption read, "Manifesting the dream. Big things coming. The universe provides." I zoomed in on the photo. The resolution was high. Sienna had the latest iPhone, paid for by my father. The binder was open. Most of the text was blurry, just scribbles and fabric samples. But on the right side of the page, there was a sticky note. It was bright yellow, stuck to a printout of a floral arch. I pinched the screen, zooming in until the pixels started to fuzz. There were numbers written on the note in my mother's handwriting. Venue, $75,000. Florals, $30,000. Catering upgrade, $45,000. And then, at the bottom, circled 3 times in red ink, equity, $425,000 available, March 15th. My blood ran cold. March 15th, the day after my surgery. They hadn't just reacted to a sudden demand from the Grahams. They had budgeted my house. They had written the value of my condo onto a sticky note 6 weeks before the surgery. And Sienna had posted it. She had posted it with the caption, "The universe provides." I wasn't the universe. I was the sacrifice. Sienna knew. She had known the whole time. When I told her about my back pain, she wasn't listening to my suffering. She was calculating the timeline. When I told them the surgery date, they didn't see a medical procedure. They saw a closing date. The myth of poor ditzy Sienna evaporated. She wasn't just a spoiled brat who benefited from my parents' bad behavior. She was an accomplice. She had looked me in the eye at Christmas, hugged me, and all the while she was mentally spending the walls that protected me from the cold. I took a screenshot of the post. I cropped it. I highlighted the date and the number. I sent it to Evan Carter. Then, I did something petty. Something wonderfully, dangerously petty. I opened a drawer in my desk where I kept stationery. I pulled out a heavy cream-colored card with gold edges. It was elegant, expensive. I picked up a fountain pen. I didn't want to text her. A text is easily deleted. A text is casual. I wanted something physical, something she would have to hold in her hand. I wrote, "Dearest Sienna, I saw your post. You are right. Family should support family. I have been thinking about your big day, and I realized I haven't given you a proper gift yet. The check my parents wrote you came from my account, but I want to give you something that is purely from me. I am bringing a surprise to the wedding. It is something old, something new, something borrowed, and something true. See you at the altar. Love, Nora." It was vague enough to sound like a peace offering to anyone else. Something true could mean a heartfelt speech. But to a guilty conscience? To a girl who knew she had spent her sister's house? Something true was a threat. I sealed the envelope. I addressed it to my parents' house, my house, where Sienna was currently staying. I put a stamp on it. I would drop it in the mail tomorrow. It would arrive 3 days before the wedding. Just enough time to let her sweat. Just enough time for her to wonder if I was going to hug her or hit her. My phone buzzed again. It was a text from Evan. I expected a confirmation that he had received the screenshot of the sticky note. I expected a dry legal comment about evidence of premeditation. Instead, the message was short. "Evan, are you sitting down?" I typed back, "I am always lying down these days. What is it?" Evan. My investigator was digging into Sienna's background. Just due diligence. We wanted to see if she had any assets we could attach if we win a judgment. We found something else. 3 dots danced on the screen. I held my breath. Evan. It is not about money. It is about the groom. It is about how she met him. Nora. They met at a charity gala. That is the story. Evan. That is the story they tell. But we found digital footprints, old logs from a temp agency she worked at for 3 weeks, the agency that serviced the Graham family's shipping firm. Nora. So? Evan. Sienna was fired from that temp job for accessing unauthorized files, specifically, the personnel and financial files of the executive team, including Graham's. She didn't meet him by accident. Nora. She profiled him. She pulled his credit card statements, his travel itinerary, his interests. She stalked him for 6 months before she bumped into him at that gala. I stared at the screen. It was identity theft. It was corporate espionage. It was stalking. If the Graham family, people who valued privacy and reputation above all else, knew that their son hadn't fallen in love, but had been targeted by a grifter who studied his bank statements to learn his favorite wine, the wedding wouldn't just be canceled, it would be annihilated. Evan. I have the termination letter from the temp agency, and I have the logs. If you put this on the microphone, Nora, there is no coming back. They won't just be evicted. They will be social pariahs. Graham might even press criminal charges. He sent one final message. Evan, do you want to use it? I looked at the archived screenshots of the insults. I looked at the sticky note where they had priced my life at $425,000. I looked at the ceiling of the rental apartment I was forced to live in. I picked up the phone. Nora. Print it. Bring it all. The rehearsal dinner was held at the exclusive Riverfront Country Club, a venue that smelled of old mahogany, beeswax, and the kind of generational wealth that does not need to raise its voice. The invitation said 6:30 in the evening. I arrived at 7:15. I did not make an entrance. I made a statement. The double doors to the oak room were heavy, but the maitre d' pulled them open for me. I stepped onto the plush Persian runner, my left hand gripping the handle of a black carbon fiber cane. I didn't need the cane as much as I had a week ago. My physical therapy was progressing faster than Dr. Evans had predicted. But tonight, the cane was not just a medical device, it was a prop. It was a visual anchor that screamed injury and vulnerability in a room designed to celebrate perfection. Click, drag, click. The sound of the rubber tip hitting the hardwood floor cut through the low hum of conversation like a gunshot. Heads turned. The room, filled with about 50 people, the inner circle of both families, went silent. It wasn't the silence of awe. It was the silence of a record scratching. It was the collective intake of breath from people who knew there was a crack in the foundation, but were trying desperately to ignore it. I wore a dress that was arguably too dark for a spring wedding celebration, a deep, midnight navy that looked black in the dim lighting. It was tailored sharp, like armor. Beside me, Aunt Marianne walked with her head high, wearing a vintage Chanel suit that she had pulled out of storage just for this battle. She looked like a retired general inspecting the troops. My mother was the first to break the tableau. She was standing near the bar, holding a crystal flute of champagne. Her face, which had been frozen in a rictus of socialite charm, faltered for a fraction of a second. I saw the flash of pure panic in her eyes before the mask slammed back into place. "Nora!" she exclaimed, her voice pitching too high, vibrating with artificial delight. She rushed over, her silk skirt swishing. "We were so worried you wouldn't feel up to it. Look at you. You made it." She leaned in to hug me, but her body was rigid as her cheek brushed mine. She hissed into my ear, loud enough only for me to hear. "Do not make a scene. Do not embarrass us in front of the Grahams." I pulled back and smiled. It was a cold, empty smile. "I wouldn't miss it for the world. Mother," I said, my voice smooth, "I wanted to see what you bought." Her eyes widened, but she couldn't respond because my father had materialized at her elbow. He gripped my shoulder, his fingers digging in slightly too hard. "Glad you are here, kiddo," he said, booming the words for the benefit of the room. "Find a seat. We were just about to sit down for the speeches." He looked at the cane, then at my face. His eyes were not pleading anymore. They were threatening. They said, "Remember your place. Remember you are the one who fixes things, not the one who breaks them." I gently removed his hand from my shoulder, as if it were a piece of lint. "I am fine, Dad," I said. "Don't let me interrupt the performance." I walked past them, Marianne flanking me, and we made our way to a table at the periphery. As I moved through the room, I finally got a good look at the opposition. I had heard about the Graham family. Of course, my parents spoke of them as if they were royalty. But seeing them up close, I realized my parents had miscalculated. They thought the Grahams were just rich. They thought this was a merger of two upper-class families. They were wrong. The Graham family did not look like bankers or tech moguls. They looked like predators. The groom's father, a man with a chest like a barrel and hands that looked like they had crushed rocks in a past life, was watching me. The Graham empire wasn't built on stocks and bonds. It was built on logistics, maritime shipping, cargo, iron and steel moving across oceans. These were people who lived by bills of lading, strict contracts, and the absolute letter of the law. In their world, a missing container was a sin. A forged signature was a declaration of war. They were not people who appreciated messy. And then, there was the groom, Graham. He was standing near the head table, looking less like a man in love and more like a man trying to solve a puzzle he couldn't quite see. He was handsome in a traditional, square-jawed way, but there was a tightness around his eyes. He watched me walk to my table. His gaze lingered on my cane. Then it traveled up to my face. He didn't look away when I caught his eye, unlike my parents, who saw me as a nuisance, and unlike his own parents, who likely saw me as a tragic footnote. Graham looked at me with genuine curiosity. He took a step toward me, abandoning the conversation he was having with his best man. "Nora?" he called out. His voice was deep, steady. "I don't think we have officially met. I am Graham." He started to extend a hand, but before he could complete the gesture, a flurry of white lace intercepted him. "Sienna." My sister latched onto his arm with the desperation of a drowning woman clutching a piece of driftwood. "Babe," she chirped, physically turning him away from me. "The photographer needs us for the golden hour shots on the terrace. The light is perfect right now. We have to go. Now." "Sienna, your sister just got here," Graham said, frowning slightly. "She is obviously injured. I should say hello." "She is fine," Sienna insisted, her laugh brittle and sharp. "Nora hates fuss. Really, she just wants to sit down. Come on, please, for me?" She dragged him away. But over her shoulder, Graham looked back at me one last time. There was a question in his eyes. He sensed it. He sensed the vibration in the air, the invisible frequency of a lie that was about to collapse. I sat down next to Marianne. She unfolded her napkin and placed it on her lap with precise, deliberate movements. "He knows something is wrong," Marianne murmured, taking a sip of water. "The boy is not an idiot. He works in shipping. He knows how to spot damaged goods." "He doesn't know yet," I said, watching Sienna frantically whispering to him by the French doors. "But he feels the draft." The dinner began. It was a parade of extravagance: lobster bisque, filet mignon, wines that cost more than my first car. My parents were in their element, or so they pretended. My father laughed too loud at the elder Graham's jokes. My mother was constantly touching her hair. Checking her reflection in the silverware, they were dancing on a tightrope, and they didn't know I was holding the scissors. Then came the speeches. The groom's father stood up first. He spoke briefly, efficiently. He talked about mergers and partnerships and strength. He welcomed Sienna to the family with the warmth of a CEO acquiring a small subsidiary. Then, my father stood up. He tapped his glass with a spoon. The sound rang out, demanding attention. He adjusted his tie, puffing out his chest. He looked the part of the benevolent patriarch perfectly. "When I look at my little girl," he began, his voice thickening with rehearsed emotion, "I think about love, but mostly, I think about sacrifice." I felt Marianne stiffen beside me. I placed a hand on her arm to steady her. "Parents do anything for their children," my father continued, sweeping his gaze across the room. "Linda and I have worked our whole lives to give our daughters the world. We have made hard choices. We have moved mountains, because when you see your child happy, the cost doesn't matter. The sacrifice is a privilege." He paused for effect. The room murmured its approval. Guests dabbed at their eyes. Then, he made a mistake, a fatal, arrogant mistake. He looked directly at me. It was meant to be a look of inclusion, a signal to the room that we were a united front. But I saw the subtext. His eyes were cold, hard flint. "I sacrificed your house," his eyes said. "I sacrificed your security, and I would do it again. Sit there and clap. Nora, you owe us this." I did not clap. I picked up my glass of water and raised it to him in a silent, mocking toast. I took a slow sip. The speech ended. The room applauded. My father sat down, looking pleased with himself. He thought he had cemented the narrative. He thought he had buried the body. The dinner wound down, and people began to mingle. The tension in my chest was a physical weight. But it wasn't fear. It was the adrenaline of a hunter who has the target in the crosshairs. I stood up, gripping my cane. "Are we leaving?" Marianne asked. "Not yet," I said. "I have to deliver a message." I navigated through the crowd. I didn't go to my parents. I went straight to the center of the room, where Sienna was holding court with her bridesmaids. She saw me coming. Her smile faltered. She looked around for Graham, but he had been pulled away by his father to discuss business with an uncle. She was unprotected. "Nora," she said, her voice tight. "You made it." "I did," I said. I didn't hug her. I stood just inside her personal space, close enough that she had to look up at me. Nice dress. Sienna. Very expensive. Thanks, she mumbled, shifting her weight. Look, about the post. I was just venting. You know how social media is. I do, I said. I know exactly how it is. It creates a record. She flinched. Why are you being like this? Can't you just be happy for me? It is my wedding. I am very happy for you, I said. My voice was low, gentle, and terrifying. In fact, I am so happy that I wanted to make sure you got my gift. Gift? She blinked. I didn't see anything on the table. It is not on the table, I said. It is coming on the big day. I have been working on it with a professional. It is a surprise. I leaned in closer. I smelled her expensive perfume, the scent of vanilla and denial. You know how Dad talked about sacrifice? I whispered. He was right. Sacrifices have to be made. But usually, in the old stories, the sacrifice is voluntary. When you force someone onto the altar, Sienna, that isn't a sacrifice. That is a slaughter. Her face went pale. The blood drained out of her cheeks so fast her makeup stood out in stark relief. What are you going to do? She hissed. Nora, seriously, Graham's family, they are intense. Don't ruin this. If you do something crazy, I will never forgive you. I smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had smiled in weeks. You won't have to forgive me, I said. You will just have to live with the consequences. I have a wedding gift, Sienna, and I promise you, you will remember it for the rest of your life. I didn't wait for her response. I turned around, the rubber tip of my cane pivoting on the polished floor. I walked away. I could feel her eyes boring into my back. I could feel the panic radiating off her like heat waves. She didn't know what I knew. She didn't know about the house on Elm Street. She didn't know about the investigation into her temp job. She just knew that the sister she had stepped on was no longer lying down. Marianne met me at the door. We walked out into the cool night air, the valet already pulling up my rental car. That was brutal, Marianne said, her voice filled with admiration. She looks like she is about to vomit. Good, I said. Let her stew in it for 2 days. Let her wonder. Fear is a better torture than any speech I could give. Marianne opened the car door for me. She paused, her hand on the frame. Nora, she said, her tone serious for a moment. Are you sure about this? Once we drop the hammer on Saturday, the family is done. Not just the money, the relationships, Dad, Mom, Sienna, they will hate you forever. I looked back at the glowing windows of the country club. I could see the silhouettes of the people inside. My parents, laughing, drinking, spending money that wasn't theirs, living in a house they didn't own, celebrating a marriage built on fraud. I thought about the voicemail. We facilitated the sale. I thought about the sticky note. Equity, $425,000. I looked at Marianne. I am sure, I said. I am only sure of one thing. What is that? They will never dare to treat me like an object again. I got into the car. The door slammed shut, sealing out the noise of the party. The silence inside the car was heavy, but for the first time since I woke up from surgery. It didn't feel lonely. It felt like the quiet before a judge reads a verdict. The wedding reception was a masterclass in aggressive opulence. If the rehearsal dinner had been a display of wealth, the wedding itself was a scream. The ballroom of the Grand Hotel had been transformed into the ethereal garden my mother had obsessed over for months. Thousands of white wisteria stems hung from the ceiling, creating a suffocating canopy of floral perfume that masked the scent of desperation. There were crystal chandeliers the size of small cars, tables draped in silk imported from Italy, and a champagne tower that rose 6 feet into the air, a fragile monument to my parents' vanity. I sat at table 19. It was positioned in the back corner, right next to the swinging doors of the catering kitchen. Every time a waiter burst through with a tray of filet mignon, a gust of steam and the smell of dish soap hit me. My parents had seated me here intentionally. It was the table for the outliers, the distant cousins, the elderly neighbors who were too deaf to converse, and me. It was exile, but I did not feel insulted. I felt relieved. From this vantage point, I could see everything. I could see the way my mother flitted from table to table, her laughter too loud, her eyes scanning the room to make sure the Graham family was impressed. I could see my father at the head table, his face flushed with bourbon and triumph, clapping the elder Mr. Graham on the back with a familiarity that was not reciprocated. I could see Sienna, looking breathtakingly beautiful in a dress that cost more than my first year of college tuition, clinging to Graham's hand. She looked happy, but it was a brittle happiness. Her eyes kept darting around the room, as if she were waiting for the ceiling to collapse. I took a sip of water. I was not drinking tonight. I needed to be sharper than a diamond cutter. Next to me, Aunt Marianne was dissecting her salad with surgical precision. She was the only other person at table 19 who wasn't intimidated by the seating arrangement. She looked like a queen holding court in a dungeon. "Look at them," Marianne murmured, nodding toward the head table. "They think they have crossed the finish line." "They have," I said, smoothing the napkin on my lap. "They just don't know the race was rigged." The dinner service dragged on for 2 hours. I watched the guests eat the food that my condo had paid for. I watched them drink the wine that had been purchased with my equity. I calculated the cost of every bite. That lobster tail? That was my kitchen renovation. That centerpiece? That was my emergency fund. When the plates were cleared and the lights dimmed, the speeches began. The best man told a series of frat boy jokes that landed poorly with the Graham side of the family. The maid of honor, one of Sienna's influencer friends, cried through a speech about how Sienna was the kindest soul in the universe, a statement so factually incorrect I almost choked on my ice chip. Then, my father stood up. The room went quiet. He adjusted the microphone, the feedback whining for a split second. He looked out over the sea of 200 faces. He looked powerful. He looked redeemed. "What a night," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "Linda and I are so overwhelmed to see our little Sienna find a man like Graham, a family like the Grahams. It validates everything we have worked for." He rambled for a few minutes about love and legacy. He told a story about Sienna as a child that I knew for a fact was actually a story about me. But he had reassigned the protagonist to fit the occasion. I checked my watch. It was time. I reached down and picked up my cane. I also picked up the thick manila envelope that had been resting against my leg. I was preparing to stand up and walk to the exit, to leave them to their lie. But then my father went off script. Maybe it was the alcohol. Maybe it was the arrogance of a man who believes he is untouchable. Maybe he saw me sitting in the shadows of table 19 and felt a need to twist the knife one last time. "You know," he said, squinting into the darkness of the ballroom, "raising 2 daughters is not easy. We have had our ups and downs, but tonight is about unity, and I want to invite my oldest daughter, Nora, to come up here." The room froze. Sienna's head snapped toward him. Her eyes went wide with horror. She shook her head slightly, mouthing, "No, Dad, no." But he didn't see her. He was looking for me. "Nora?" he called out, his voice taking on a challenging edge. "Where are you? Come on up. Say a few words for your sister. I know you have been through a tough time with your back, but family supports family, right?" It was a trap. If I refused, I looked like the bitter, jealous sister sulking in the corner. If I accepted, he expected me to stammer out a few generic congratulations and publicly submit to his narrative. He wanted me to kiss the ring. He wanted to show the Grahams that even the difficult daughter was under his control. I looked at Marianne. She raised one perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Go," her eyes said. I stood up. I did not hurry. I walked toward the stage with the slow, inevitable rhythm of a funeral procession. Thud. Step. Thud. Step. The cane hitting the floor was the only sound in the room. 200 pairs of eyes followed me. I saw pity in some of them. I saw curiosity in others. I saw terror in my mother's face. She was gripping the tablecloth so hard her knuckles were white. I reached the dance floor. The stage was 5 steps up. I took them one by one, agonizingly slow. The DJ lowered the music until there was total silence. My father was smiling, but his eyes were tight. He extended the microphone to me like a weapon. "Here she is," he announced, clapping me on the shoulder. "My resilient girl." I took the microphone. I did not smile. I placed my cane against the podium. I placed the manila envelope next to it. I looked at Sienna. She was trembling. I looked at Graham. He was leaning forward, his elbows on the table, watching me with that same intense focus he had shown at the rehearsal dinner. I looked at my father. "Thank you, Dad," I said. My voice was calm. It did not shake. It was the voice of a woman who had already died once on an operating table and had nothing left to fear. "Dad is right," I addressed the crowd. "I have contributed a lot to this wedding. In fact, I think it is fair to say that without my contribution, none of this would be here. Not the flowers, not the wine, not the band." My father nodded, thinking I was talking about emotional support. "That is right," he encouraged. "Nora has been helpful." "I am glad you agree," I said. I turned to the guests. 7 weeks ago, I underwent an 8-hour spinal fusion surgery," I said. "It was a difficult procedure. I was under heavy anesthesia. I was unconscious and vulnerable." The room was silent. People were leaning in, confused by the shift in tone. "While I was lying on that table," I continued, my voice becoming sharper, clearer. "My parents, Thomas and Linda Hamilton, went to a title company." My father's smile vanished. He took a half step toward me. "Nora," he warned, his voice low. "Sit down." I ignored him. I raised my voice slightly, projecting to the back of the room, to table 19. "They used a medical power of attorney, a document I signed so they could make life or death decisions if I went into a coma, to sell my home." A gasp rippled through the room. It started at the front tables and rolled backward like a wave. "They sold my condo," I said, enunciating every word. "My life savings, my sanctuary. They sold it for $425,000, cash, and they did it because they needed to pay for the wisteria you see hanging above your heads." "She is on medication," my father shouted, grabbing for the microphone. "She is delirious. Cut the mic." I pulled the microphone away. I was faster than him. I was fueled by a rage that burned colder than liquid nitrogen. "I am not delirious," I said, "and I have receipts." I opened the manila envelope. I pulled out the enlarged photocopy of the sale deed and the power of attorney. I held them up. "Here is the timestamp," I said, pointing to the paper. 2:30 in the afternoon. I was in the recovery room. Here is the signature. Thomas Hamilton, acting as agent. Here is the deposit slip, transferring the funds to the wedding venue's account. I looked at the Graham family. The father, the shipping magnate, was on his feet. His face was a mask of thunder. He knew what fraud looked like. He knew what embezzlement looked like. "They stole $425,000 from their daughter while she was cut open on a surgical table," I said to the room, "to impress you. To throw a party that they could not afford." "Security!" my mother screamed, standing up and knocking over her wineglass. Red wine spilled across the white tablecloth like blood. "Get her out of here. She is ruining everything." 2 security guards started to move toward the stage, but Graham stood up. He raised a hand. "Wait," Graham commanded. His voice cracked like a whip. The guards stopped. Graham looked at me. He looked at the papers in my hand. Then he looked at Sienna. "Is this true?" he asked. Sienna was sobbing now, her face buried in her hands. She didn't deny it. She couldn't. My father was panting, his face purple. "It was a loan," he sputtered. "A family loan. We were going to pay her back. She is twisting everything." I turned back to the microphone. "It was not a loan," I said. "And I know you can't pay me back. The money is gone. It is in the champagne. It is in the decor. It is in the dress. I paused. I let the silence stretch until it was almost unbearable. But that is fine, I said. I accept that the money is gone. Consider it my wedding gift. I paid for this party, so I suppose I am the host. I saw the confusion on my father's face. He thought I was capitulating. He thought I was giving up. However, I said, that is not the only gift I have for you. I reached back into the envelope. I pulled out the second set of documents. The older ones, the ones with the blue cover sheet of the LLC. You see, I said, my voice dropping to a conversational, intimate volume that echoed through the silent ballroom. My father mentioned sacrifice. He mentioned how he has provided a beautiful home for his family on Elm Street, the house you all know, the house where the bridal party got ready this morning. My mother stopped screaming. She stared at the papers in my hand. For 5 years, I said. My parents have been paying rent to a company called North Hill Management. They think it is an investment firm. They think they are clever tenants fooling a corporate landlord. I smiled at my father. He looked like he was having a stroke. North Hill, I explained. Nora, Hamilton. It is an anagram. The realization hit him. His knees actually buckled. He grabbed the edge of the table to stay upright. I own the house, I told the room. I bought it 5 years ago when they were being foreclosed on. I saved them from eviction. I have been subsidizing their rent. I have been paying for the roof over their heads while they treated me like a servant. I held up the eviction notice. It was a stark, white piece of paper. You stole my home, I said to my parents, so I am taking back mine. I turned to the crowd, to the horrified faces of the guests, to the stone-faced Grahams. My parents are not the wealthy socialites they pretend to be, I declared. They are tenants, and as of this moment, they are evicted. I looked at Sienna. She had stopped crying. She was staring at me with the hollow, dead eyes of someone who realizes the ground has vanished beneath her feet. Happy wedding day, Sienna, I said. I hope you enjoyed the party. It cost me everything I had. But the eviction notice? That one is on the house. I dropped the microphone. It hit the stage with a deafening thud that sounded exactly like a gavel coming down. I picked up my cane. I didn't look at my father, who was gasping for air. I didn't look at my mother, who had fainted or was pretending to faint. I walked down the stairs. The room parted for me. People scrambled to get out of my way as if I were radioactive. I walked straight toward the exit, toward the night, toward the first breath of air that truly belonged to me. But before I reached the doors, a voice stopped me. Wait, it wasn't my father. It was Evan Carter. He stepped out from the shadows near the bar. He wasn't smiling. He looked serious. He held up his phone. Nora, he said, loud enough for the Grahams to hear. You forgot the other part. I stopped. I looked back at the head table. Graham was standing there, looking at me, waiting. I had destroyed their finances. I had destroyed their reputation. But there was one final nail left in the coffin, the one that would turn this tragedy into a criminal investigation. I looked at Evan. I nodded. Tell them, I said. The silence that followed the drop of the microphone was not empty. It was heavy, pressurized, and vibrating with the kind of energy that precedes a natural disaster. For 5 seconds, nobody moved. The waitstaff stood frozen with pitchers of water halfway to glasses. The DJ had his hands hovered over his mixing board, terrified to break the tension. My father was the first to shatter the freeze. He lunged for the podium, his face a mottled map of red rage and purple panic. He didn't look at me. He looked at the crowd, desperate to salvage the illusion he had spent 30 years constructing. This is a prank, he bellowed, his voice cracking without the amplification of the microphone. My daughter has a sick sense of humor. The medication, as I said. She is confused. North Hill Management is a reputable firm in Delaware. I have spoken to their agents. This is insanity. He was sweating. A line of perspiration was trickling down his temple. Cutting through his foundation, I did not argue. I did not shout back. I simply stepped aside and nodded to the shadows where Evan Carter was waiting. Evan walked onto the dance floor. He did not look like a wedding guest. He looked like a shark in a tailored Italian suit. He carried a leather briefcase, and he moved with the absolute authority of a man who knows the law is a loaded gun, and he is the only one holding the trigger. He stopped next to me. He didn't need a microphone. He had a courtroom projection to his voice. "My name is Evan Carter," he announced. "I am the attorney of record for Ms. Nora Hamilton and for North Hill Management, LLC." My mother, who had been slumped in her chair, suddenly sat bolt upright. She knew that name. She knew Evan from the society pages, knew he represented the kind of money she could only dream of. Evan opened his briefcase. He pulled out a single document, stiff and blue-backed. "I have here the Articles of Organization, filed with the Secretary of State 5 years ago," Evan said, holding the document up so the light from the chandeliers caught the official gold seal. "It lists the sole member and manager of the LLC. There is only one name on this document." He looked directly at my father. "Nora Hamilton." My father opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish pulled onto a dock, gasping for air that wasn't there. "Furthermore," Evan continued, his voice slicing through the room, "I have the banking records. For 60 months, checks signed by Thomas Hamilton were deposited into a business account. From that account, property taxes and insurance were paid, and the remainder? It sat there. Ms. Hamilton never took a single distribution. She never spent a penny of your rent money. She kept it in a reserve fund for repairs, for your roof, for your water heater." Evan lowered the paper. "You are not tenants of a faceless corporation. Mr. Hamilton, you are the beneficiaries of your daughter's charity that you repaid by liquidating her assets while she was unconscious." The word charity hit my father harder than a fist. To a man like him, being a charity case was worse than being a criminal. "Whatever," my father sputtered, trying to wave it away, but his hand was shaking so badly he knocked over a salt shaker. "This is a family matter. We will discuss the lease later. This is neither the time nor the place." "Actually," I said, stepping back into the light, "the time is exactly right, because the lease has a clause. Clause 14B. I looked at my mother. Her eyes were wide, glassy, and terrified. "It is a month-to-month agreement now," I stated flatly. "I am giving you notice, proper, legal notice. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. I am selling the house on Elm Street." "You can't!" my mother shrieked. It was a raw, ugly sound. "Where will we go? That is our home." "No," I corrected her. "It is my house. The condo was my home, and since you sold mine, I need a place to live. I am taking my property back." I turned away from them. I was done with them. I wanted to see the people who actually mattered in this equation. I looked at the head table. The Grahams were not shouting. They were not crying. They were doing something far more dangerous. They were calculating. Mr. Graham, the shipping magnate, was sitting perfectly still. He had pushed his plate away. He was looking at the centerpiece, a massive arrangement of white orchids that probably cost $2,000. And then he looked at me. Then he looked at my father. He picked up a crystal glass of champagne. He held it up to the light, inspecting the bubbles. "Wait a minute, mister," Graham said. His voice was low, gravelly, and carried an air of absolute command. He put the glass down. He didn't drink it. "If the condo was sold for $425,000 on the 14th, mister," Graham said, doing the mental math that defined his career, "and the final vendor payments for this event were made on the 15th. He let the sentence hang in the air. He turned to his wife, Eleanor. She was a steel-spined woman who ran the family foundation. She looked at the tablecloth, then at the flowers, then at the band. "We are sitting in stolen property," Eleanor said. Her voice was ice. "This isn't a celebration. It is a crime scene." She stood up. "Graham," she said to her son. Graham had not moved. He was sitting next to Sienna, but there was a mile of distance between them. He was staring at the table, his jaw working. He looked like a man who had just realized the bridge he was standing on was made of paper. He turned to Sienna. Sienna was weeping silently, tears ruining her spray tan, leaving streaks of orange and white down her neck. She reached for his hand. He pulled it away. "Sienna," Graham said. His voice was quiet, but in the dead silence of the ballroom, it sounded like a shout. "I didn't know," Sienna sobbed. "I swear, Graham, I didn't know they sold it. They just told me they found the money. They said business was good." "Don't lie to me," Graham said. "I am not lying," she pleaded, grabbing his sleeve. "I am a victim too. My sister is crazy. She is jealous." "Stop," Graham said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen a few times. "My mother follows you," Graham said. "She showed me a post from weeks ago. A sticky note. I didn't think anything of it at the time. I thought it was just your family's finances. But I remember the number. 425,000. He held the phone up. "You posted a picture of the budget," Graham said. "You wrote equity and the date. You knew exactly where the money was coming from. You knew she was having surgery on that day." Sienna froze. The lie died in her throat. "It was for us," she screamed, abandoning the denial. "Graham, please. We needed the money to match your family. We couldn't look poor in front of your friends. I did it for you. I did it so you wouldn't be embarrassed by us." The admission rang through the hall. "I did it for you." Graham looked at her with an expression of profound disgust. It wasn't anger. It was repulsion. It was the look you give to something rotting. "You stole your sister's home to buy me a party?" he asked. "You think that is what I wanted? You think I wanted to start a marriage on fraud?" "We can fix it," Sienna cried. "Daddy will pay her back. We will make it right." "With what money?" Graham asked ruthlessly. "Your father is being evicted. You are unemployed. You have nothing. Sienna, everything you showed me was a lie. The house, the lifestyle, the values, it is all smoke." He stood up. He unpinned the boutonniere from his lapel, a white rose that cost $20, and placed it gently on the table. "Mom? Dad?" Graham said. "I am done." "Mrs. Graham nodded. She didn't look at my parents. She didn't look at Sienna. She signaled to the guests on her side of the room. The business partners. The shipping executives. The people who understood contracts. "We are leaving," she announced. It was a mass exodus. 50 people stood up almost in unison. Chairs scraped against the floor. My mother ran toward Mrs. Graham, grabbing her arm. "Eleanor, please, let's go to the bridal suite. We can talk about this. It is a misunderstanding. We can work out a payment plan." Mrs. Graham looked at my mother's hand on her silk sleeve as if it were a cockroach. "Do not touch me," Mrs. Graham said. "If you contact my family again, you will hear from our legal team regarding the return of the engagement ring and the reimbursement for the rehearsal dinner." She turned and walked out. Graham followed her. He didn't look back. Sienna collapsed onto the floor, her white dress billowing around her like a deflated parachute. She wailed, a sound of pure, selfish misery. And then, the phones came out. The remaining guests, my parents' friends, the distant relatives, the people from Table 19, realized that the social contract was broken. Politeness was dead. This was no longer a wedding. It was a spectacle. I saw the flashes. I saw the red recording lights. People were live streaming. "Can you believe this?" someone whispered near me. "Evicted at her own wedding." "The sister is a savage," someone else chuckled. "But did you hear the numbers? 400 grand? My father was standing alone on the stage. The microphone was at his feet. He looked small. He looked old. The bluster was gone. He stared at the retreating backs of the Graham family, his ticket to the big leagues walking out the door. He looked at me. "You ruined us," he mouthed. I looked back at him, leaning on my cane. "No," I said, though he couldn't hear me. "I just turned on the lights." I signaled to Evan. "Let's go. I think the toast is over." We turned to leave. I felt a strange lightness in my chest. It wasn't happiness, exactly. It was the absence of weight. The secret I had carried for 5 years was gone. The obligation to protect them was gone. The condo was gone. Yes, but so was the chain that tethered me to their expectations. I walked toward the side exit, away from the screaming Sienna and the stunned crowd. But just as I reached the door, Evan grabbed my elbow. He pulled me into the alcove near the kitchen service entrance. The chaos of the ballroom was muffled here, but the air was still thick with adrenaline. Evan leaned in close. His face was grave. He wasn't looking at the crowd anymore. He was looking at his phone. "Nora," he whispered, "we are not done." "What do you mean?" I asked. "They are destroyed. The wedding is off. The Grahams left." "Yes," Evan said. "But that was the civil penalty. That was the social penalty. I just got the rest of the file from the investigator." He looked around to make sure no one was listening. "We knew Sienna snooped on Graham's files at the temp agency," Evan said. "We knew she profiled him, but we thought she just looked at his credit card statements to see what wine he liked." "Right," I said. "Stalking? Gross, but not a felony." "Wrong," Evan said. "She didn't just look, Nora. She downloaded." My stomach tightened. "Downloaded what?" "She copied the Graham Logistics proprietary shipping routes," Evan said, his voice barely audible. "And 2 weeks before she met Graham at that gala. There was a data breach at the firm. A competitor got hold of those routes. The Grahams lost a contract worth $12 million. I stared at him. The wisteria hanging from the ceiling suddenly looked like nooses. "Are you saying—" "I am saying there is a direct digital link between Sienna's login at the temp agency and the IP address that sold the data," Evan said. "She didn't just marry him for money. She sold his family's secrets to finance her life before she even met him. That is how she afforded the wardrobe to catch him." He held up the phone. "This is federal, Nora. This is corporate espionage. If I give this to Graham—" He let the question hang there. I looked back into the ballroom. Sienna was still on the floor, crying about her ruined party. My parents were trying to block the cameras of the guests. They thought this was the worst night of their lives. They thought they had hit rock bottom because they lost a house and a groom. They had no idea. I looked at Evan. "He deserves to know," I said. "And she deserves a cell that I don't own." Evan nodded. "If you hand him this file," Evan warned, "there is no coming back. She goes to prison, real prison, for 5 to 10 years. I thought about the sticky note. I thought about the $425,000. I thought about the text she sent me. "Get well soon." "Give me the file," I said. "I have one last gift to deliver." I took the file from Evan. It was thin, just a few pages of digital forensics, but it held enough weight to crush what was left of my sister's life. "Are you sure?" Evan asked one last time. "Once this leaves your hand, it is war, not a family dispute, a federal war." I looked at the ballroom. My mother was clutching the tablecloth. My father was staring at the floor. Sienna was wailing on the ground, a puddle of white tulle and misery. They looked defeated, but I knew them. Give them a week, and they would spin this. They would tell the world I was mentally unstable. They would say I caused a scene because I was jealous of Sienna's happiness. They would find a way to make themselves the victims and me the monster, unless I burned the bridge so thoroughly that no one could ever cross it again. "It is not war," I said to Evan. "It is evidence." I walked fast. My cane clicked rhythmically against the marble floor of the hallway. I caught up to the Graham family just as they were waiting for their valet. Graham was standing apart from his parents. He was staring at the night sky, his jaw set so hard a muscle feathered in his cheek. "Graham," I said. He turned. His eyes were cold. He looked at me not with anger, but with exhaustion. "Nora," he said, "I think you have done enough. My mother is already on the phone with our general counsel." "I know," I said. "And I am sorry. I did not want to humiliate you, but if I had told you in private, Sienna would have lied. My parents would have covered for her. You needed to see the truth when they had nowhere to hide. I saw it, he said grimly. $425,000. I saw it. That was the money, I said. I held out the file. This is the method. He looked at the folder. He didn't want to take it. What is this? You lost a contract last year, I said. $12 million. The logistics routes for the Pacific Rim. You thought it was a corporate hack. Graham froze. He looked at me sharply. How do you know about that? Because the IP address that accessed your servers didn't come from China or Russia, I said. It came from a temp agency in downtown Chicago, from a terminal assigned to Sienna Hamilton. Graham snatched the folder from my hand. He flipped it open. He scanned the logs. He saw the dates. He saw the download history. His face went from pale to a terrifying shade of gray. She stole the data, he whispered. She stole our proprietary routes and sold them. That is how she had the money for the wardrobe. That is how she afforded the trips where she accidentally met me. She didn't just target your heart, Graham, I said softly. She targeted your server. Graham closed the folder. He looked at me with a strange expression. It was respect, mixed with horror. Thank you, he said. He turned and walked back to his father. He handed the file to the older man. I watched as the father read it. I saw the moment the father realized that this wasn't just a failed marriage. It was a corporate felony. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. I heard him say 2 words before the valet door closed. FBI. Now. I turned back to the ballroom. My parents had followed me out. They were standing in the hallway, looking like ghosts. My father's tuxedo was rumpled. My mother's mascara was running down her face in black rivulets. What did you give him? My father demanded, his voice trembling. What did you do, Nora? I gave him the truth, I said. I gave him the reason why his company lost $12 million last year. Sienna, who had dragged herself off the floor and followed them, let out a strangled sound. She knew. She realized that the game wasn't just over. The board had been flipped. You are a monster, my mother hissed. You destroyed your sister. You destroyed us. All over a condo? All over money? You are selfish. Nora, you have always been selfish. I looked at them, really looked at them. For 33 years, I had craved their approval. I had wanted them to look at me the way they looked at Sienna. I had broken my back, literally and metaphorically, trying to be good enough. And here, at the end of it all, they still couldn't see me. They only saw what I provided. And now that I had stopped providing, they saw nothing but an enemy. The realization was liberating. I am not selfish, I said. My voice was calm, echoing in the empty hallway. I am solvent. I stepped closer to them. I did not ruin this wedding, I said. I just returned it to its correct funding source. You wanted a spectacle? You bought it with my money. Now, you are paying for it with your reputation. We are your parents, my father shouted. You owe us. I don't owe you a thing, I said. But you owe me. You owe me $425,000, and since I know you don't have it, I will take the house. You wouldn't dare, my mother spat. You wouldn't put your own mother on the street. You have 30 days, I said. The eviction notice is legally binding. If you are not out by the 1st of the month, the sheriff will remove you. And Mom? She glared at me. Make sure you clean the carpets, I said. I want my property in good condition. I turned and walked away. I walked out the front doors of the hotel, past the valets, past the expensive cars, and into the night. I got into my rental car. I drove to my temporary apartment. I sat on the balcony in the dark, listening to the city sounds. My back hurried, a dull throb. But for the first time in years, the pain felt manageable. It was just physical. The emotional burden, the heavy, suffocating weight of carrying my family, was gone. The dominoes fell faster than I expected. The video of my speech went viral within 24 hours. One of the guests, a cousin I barely knew, had live-streamed the whole thing on TikTok. It was titled, "The Eviction Wedding." It had 3 million views by Monday morning. The comments were brutal. The internet does not forgive wedding fraud. Strangers dissected my parents' facial expressions. They analyzed Sienna's sobbing. They cheered when I dropped the microphone. My father lost his job on Tuesday. He worked in commercial sales, an industry built on trust and reputation. When you become the face of familial embezzlement, clients stop returning your calls. He was asked to resign to spend more time with his family. It was the corporate kiss of death. The eviction proceeded exactly as Evan had predicted. My parents tried to fight it. They hired a cheap lawyer who tried to claim that the lease was invalid because of familial understanding. Evan crushed them in court in less than 10 minutes. The judge looked at the paperwork, the LLC documents, the rent checks, the clear title, and signed the order. They moved out on the 29th day. I didn't go to watch. I didn't want the satisfaction. I sent a property manager to do the final walkthrough. They left the house a mess. There were holes in the walls where pictures had been ripped down. The carpets were stained. It was a final, petty act of vandalism. I didn't care. I deducted the repairs from their security deposit, which, ironically, I had funded 5 years ago, and listed the house for sale the next week. It sold in 4 days. I took the proceeds, combined them with the money I had left, and bought a small, quiet house on the other side of the city. It wasn't a condo. It was a house with a garden and a high fence, a place no one had a key to but me. Sienna did not go to prison, but only because the Graham family wanted to avoid a public trial. They made a deal. Sienna had to sign a confession admitting to the data theft, which they kept in a vault. If she ever spoke about them, ever tried to monetize her relationship with Graham, or ever stepped out of line, they would hand it to the prosecutor. She was also stripped of every asset she had to pay back a fraction of the damages. The car was repossessed. The designer clothes were sold. Sienna Hamilton, the girl who was too good to work, the girl who needed vibes, got a job. She works at a cosmetics counter in a mall in Ohio now. She stands on her feet for 8 hours a day, selling lipstick to women who have no idea who she is. I heard from Aunt Marianne that she complains constantly about her feet hurting. I smiled when I heard that. Welcome to the real world, Sienna. As for me, I healed. It took 6 months of physical therapy to get my full range of motion back. I still have a scar on my back, a thin silver line that marks the place where they cut me open, but I like the scar. It reminds me that I survived. I didn't keep all the money from the sale of the house on Elm Street. I took the amount they stole from me, the $425,000, and put it back into my retirement fund. The rest? The profit from the appreciation of the house? I started a foundation. It is a small fund that provides legal aid to victims of financial abuse within families. It pays for lawyers for daughters whose parents steal their credit. It pays for forensic accountants for wives whose husbands hide assets. I called it the Open Door Fund, because the only way to escape a trap is to have a door you can walk through. I haven't spoken to my parents in a year. My mother sends me emails sometimes. They vacillate between begging for money and telling me I am going to hell. I have a filter set up that sends them directly to a folder I never open. I don't need their apology. An apology is just words, and my family has proven that their words are counterfeit currency. I have something better than an apology. I have a boundary. I was sitting in my garden yesterday, drinking coffee, watching the sun come up over the fence I paid for. My phone rang. It was Aunt Marianne. I saw your father at the grocery store, she told me. He looks 10 years older. He tried to tell me that he forgives you. I laughed. It was a genuine, deep laugh that came from my belly. He forgives me? I asked. That is rich. He says he is waiting for you to reach out, Marianne said. He says you will come back eventually. That blood is thicker than water. I looked at the deed to my house, which was sitting on the table next to my coffee. I looked at the piece I had built, brick by brick, without them. Blood might be thicker than water, I said to Marianne, but it is not thicker than ink. I hung up the phone. I didn't block the number, because I didn't need to. I had already blocked them from my life. I took a sip of coffee. It tasted like freedom. Thank you so much for listening to my story on Kate Revenge Stories. I know families can be complicated, but I hope my journey reminds you that you never have to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Are you tuning in from your car, your kitchen, or maybe while you are at work? Let me know in the comments below. I love reading about where our community is from. If you enjoyed seeing justice served, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and smash the hype button to help this story reach more people who might need to hear it. Stay strong, and remember, keep your receipts.